Alright, so as most New Vegas modders and general Fallout and gaming news junkies are probably already aware of, recently there has been a very explosive meeting between the Frontier, a fan, and a whole lot of shit. Now, I know the parasites are probably already foaming at the mouth working on their own dissertations of the. Um, I was gonna say controversy, but there's really no controversy here at all. The facts are pretty straightforward. One, a developer on the Frontier had disgusting pedophilic content on their personal art pages. I don't really feel compelled to confirm that for myself. I would think if it weren't true, it would have been easily dismissed. For the record, I consider the sexualization of disturbingly young looking anime girls and child coded non human characters to be pedophilic. Just so we're clear. Two, there's a lot of gross sexual shit in the Frontier in general, some of which is itself pedophilic in nature. So, on the first matter, I think removing Zoo the Skunk's contributions from mod wholesale is the right call. To be clear, I don't know exactly what Zoo did in the mod itself. I think they were primarily an icon artist. I've heard discourse about a certain room associated with Zoo. I don't know the details, nor do I think they're really relevant. Zoo should just be scrubbed from the project, and I have no empathy for them given the nature of the allegations. On the second matter, I have to say that TJ Spy and whoever else was in charge of deciding what kind of content is going to be in the mod and how it's going to be portrayed, you guys fucked up here. There's no other interpretation. That's what happened. I could write an entire essay on the subject of depicting explicit and sensitive topics in storytelling, but for the most part, the gist of that essay would just be don't. Now, I think I know what the writer was trying to do and failed horrendously, and that's it's Fallout. It's all about the worst humanity has to offer, and what's more evil than a pedophile? So I'm able to believe the possibility that this was just a horrendous misfire on behalf of the writer, and if that is the case, I can extend my empathy. But despite that, and still on the subject of empathy, I want the person who wrote this content, the person who okayed it, or just a bystander who doesn't see what the big deal is, I want you to think about two people. Okay? The first is a person that was sexually exploited, possibly as a child. The other is a person that has sexually exploited someone, possibly a child. Given the statistics of sex crimes in the US alone, there is a fair chance that people fitting one of those descriptions is part of the audience for your game. Alright, so the question this inevitably leads to, would you want to subject a victim to or provide a predator with that kind of material in your game? If you have any decency, the answer to that question must be no. And I mean that question because those two things are not mutually exclusive. In fact, you cannot have one without the other. These are things that you should have thought about before you decided to put that kind of stuff in your game. And if you want to say, well, I didn't know that stuff was in the game to begin with. No, that's just a bad excuse. Now, full disclosure, I have never and will probably never work on a project of this magnitude, but I would think that it was someone's job to know everything that was in the mod and should be thinking about these things that I'm discussing and should have made the call whether that stuff should be in the game at all. And if you did have someone doing that job and they were doing that job, they made horrendously bad calls by letting this stuff stay in the mod. All right, now let's relax a bit. We've got the truly problematic stuff out of the way, so let's lighten the mood a bit and talk about fetishes. Look, I don't really care if you're into kinky shit, fantastical or otherwise. If it's between consenting adults entities, I don't have a problem with it. At the same time, my feedback here is going to be pretty much the same as what I've said about the real questionable stuff from before. And that's just don't. This kind of touches on a larger problem I have with sex in media in general, and that's that if you want to have a lot of explicit sexuality in your product, just make a porno. Because then people at least expect that kind of thing. You know, my personal limit of how far you can go before you should just make a porn game is Phantasmagoria 2. Now, that game gets a little wild, though honestly it's pretty tame by the standards of your average movie. It's only really intense if you're so vanilla you've never heard of bondage. More importantly, the sexual stuff plays a part in the story of that game, wherein the protagonist is a depressed and confused man enticed into an affair with a more exciting woman who allows him to experience and explore his emotional spectrum more broadly. Moving on. Did the Frontier really need sex lizards, who, by one of the developers' own admission, are just completely irrelevant and are kind of just there? Or rather, I suppose a more fair question is, did they need to be sex lizards? It's just something that, as a concept, did not need to be part of the core Frontier experience. Now, a common defense of this is that, well, you don't have to be part of this content if you don't want. Well, no, that's not how it works. That's like saying, oh, it doesn't matter if there are people fucking in the background of this burger commercial. They're in silhouette and not the focus of the scene. When you put this kind of thing in your product, you are subjecting people to it, whether they actively participate in it or not. And this, again, coming back to what I was saying earlier, that someone, one of the project leads, I imagine, should have stepped in and thought to themselves that maybe this doesn't need to be part of this project, because, in all honesty, it does not and shouldn't have been. Now, I really am not interested in, doing the whole hour-long video essay bullshit. So this is really all I have to say. I do want to close, though, with a personal message for TJ Spy or any of the other devs, besides Zoo Snake, of course, that may be feeling responsible for this mess. Do not let the trolls, emotional parasites that they are, hurt you. Just because you fucked up, and it is important to stress that you did indeed fuck up, that does not mean you deserve the treatment you have been getting. It is good that you have recognized your mistakes. It is good there are steps being taken to correct them. Given the chance, I'm sure you would have never allowed them to be made in the first place. I think that at heart, you're a good person. Your willingness to own up to these mistakes is proof enough. You're allowed to be upset. You're allowed to cry. You're allowed to unplug and take as much time away from this as you need. This too will pass, as the Persians used to say, according to Wikipedia. Because I know the horrible, disgusting things that have been happening to innocent people on the team, and that's just not cool. And I just want to make sure you guys are okay. And that's all I have to say. So, goodbye, and we'll see what happens in the future.